They say the quietest people in a room are the ones you should fear most. And on the morning they fired me, after 35 years, I made sure to leave without a scene. I shook hands, smiled gracefully, and packed my cardigan with the pearl buttons into a cardboard box while they watched with relief, thinking they'd gotten rid of a problem. What Chad Harrison Jr. didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent 3.5 decades memorizing every secret, filing every document, and noticing every little thing they thought no one was watching. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and I was going to make sure they knew it was me.
Chapter 1. The Goodbye Email. My name is Evelyn Parker, and on the morning of March 15th, I wore my favorite navy cardigan to work. The one with the pearl buttons my late husband Frank gave me on our 30th anniversary. I remember thinking how the Dallas sunshine felt warmer than usual as I walked through the parking lot of Harrison & Cole Construction, my heels clicking against the pavement in that familiar rhythm I'd known for 35 years. 35 years. That's longer than some marriages, longer than it takes to raise a child into adulthood, longer than most people stay anywhere these days. But Harrison & Cole wasn't just my workplace. It was my second home. I knew every filing cabinet, every quirk of the ancient copy machine on the third floor, every coffee preference of every manager who'd come and gone through those glass doors. I was the head secretary, though really that title never quite captured what I did. I was the keeper of records, the smoother of ruffled feathers, the one who remembered birthdays and found lost invoices and knew exactly which vendor to call when a project went sideways at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. Old Mr. Harrison, the founder, used to say I was the spine that held the whole operation upright. He'd passed away 8 years ago, rest his soul, and I'd quietly kept his company running just the way he'd have wanted. But that morning, as I settled into my desk with my usual cup of chamomile tea, I noticed something odd. An email from HR. Subject line: brief meeting, 9:30 a.m. Brief meetings are never brief, dear, and they're rarely good news. I arrived at conference room B at exactly 9:28. I've always believed in being 2 minutes early. Not so early you seem anxious, but never late enough to seem disrespectful. The room smelled like lemon furniture polish and something else I couldn't quite name. Tension, maybe. Chad Harrison Jr. sat at the head of the table. He was 34, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd taken over as director 6 months after his father semi-retired. Next to him sat Lena Martinez, our HR manager, younger than my youngest daughter, with a tablet clutched in her manicured hands like a shield. "Evelyn, please sit down," Chad said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I smoothed my skirt and sat, folding my hands in my lap the way my mother taught me. "Always maintain your composure," she used to say. "It's the one thing no one can take from you." "Evelyn," Chad began, his voice taking on that particular tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news and want to sound compassionate about it. "We want to thank you for your many years of service to Harrison & Cole." Many years of service. That's when I knew. "The company is restructuring," Lena added quickly, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "We're modernizing our operations, moving toward digital systems, cloud-based management, and, well, we've determined that your position is being eliminated effective today." The words hung in the air like smoke. 35 years. And just like that, effective today. "I see," I said quietly. My voice was steady. "I'm proud of that. Of course, we'll provide you with a severance package 2 weeks' pay for every year of service. We think that's more than generous. I looked at the envelope, but didn't touch it. Not yet. And my pension? I asked. Will be processed according to company policy, Lena said quickly, too quickly. I nodded slowly, studying their faces. Chad looked relieved, like a man who had expected tears and was grateful to be spared them. Lena looked uncomfortable, her shoulders tight. May I ask, I said softly, who will be taking over my responsibilities? We're bringing in a younger team, Chad said. Fresh perspectives, people who understand modern technology. Younger. There it was, the word they danced around. I was 68 years old. I'd spent more than half my life keeping that company's secrets, balancing its books, covering its mistakes, and now I was too old-fashioned, too inconvenient. I understand, I said, and I did. Oh, I understood more than they could possibly imagine. I stood up, smoothed my cardigan, and picked up the envelope. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, extending my hand to Chad. He shook it, clearly surprised by my grace. As I walked back to my desk to pack my things, I felt their eyes on my back. They probably thought I was just another old woman shuffling toward retirement, too tired to fight. But here's what they didn't know. I'd learned long ago that the quietest people in the room are often the ones paying the closest attention. And over 35 years, I'd seen everything, remembered everything, documented everything. My late husband Frank used to tell me, Evie, never let them see you cry until you're ready to show them why. As I packed my framed photos and my coffee mug into a cardboard box, I smiled, really smiled for the first time that morning. They thought they were getting rid of a problem. They had no idea what they just set in motion.
Chapter 2. Forgotten Files. The house felt different when I walked through the door that afternoon, emptier somehow. Though nothing had changed, same cream-colored walls, same photos on the mantel, same afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window where it always did at 2:30. But I had changed. I set the cardboard box on the dining room table and stared at it for a long moment. 35 years of my life reduced to a coffee mug, 3 framed photographs, and a small potted succulent my coworker Jamie had given me last Christmas. She'd written on the card, "For the woman who keeps us all growing." I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile again, though my hands trembled slightly as I poured the hot water. I wasn't crying, I was past tears, but I felt something deeper than sadness settling into my bones. It was betrayal. The kind that comes when you realize the people you protected never valued you at all. I thought of Frank. He'd been gone 4 years now, but sometimes I still turned to tell him something before remembering he wasn't there. He would have been furious about what happened today. Frank had never been one for injustice, even the small, quiet kind. "Evie," he used to say, squeezing my hand across the dinner table, "you're too good to those people. They don't see you the way I do." "They need me," I'd always reply. "That's not the same as respecting you, and you're smart enough to know the difference." He'd been right, of course. He usually was. I carried my tea into Frank's old office, though I still thought of it as his, even after all this time. His desk sat against the window, neat and organized the way he'd kept it. I left everything mostly untouched, except for the computer. I learned to use it after he passed, slowly teaching myself what he'd tried to show me for years. Always keep proof when others think you're invisible, Frank had told me once, after a contractor tried to cheat him on a bathroom renovation. People make their worst mistakes when they assume no one's watching. That memory sparked something in my mind.
I opened the bottom desk drawer and pulled out an old external hard drive, a small silver thing Frank had bought me years ago. For backup, he'd said. You never know when you might need it. I'd used it faithfully, copying files from work every few months, not to be sneaky, mind you, just to be safe. Important documents, payroll records, invoices, the kind of things that might be needed if the office system crashed or files were accidentally deleted. I'd seen it happen before. I plugged the drive into the computer and waited for it to load. The folders appeared one by one. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Years of Harrison & Cole's financial history, all carefully organized by date. I opened the most recent folder, February 2025, and started scrolling through expense reports. At first, everything looked normal. Vendor payments, payroll, supply orders, the usual rhythm of business operations I'd overseen for decades. But then I noticed something odd. A series of payments to a company called Meridian Consulting Services, $5,000 paid monthly for the past 18 months. I frowned. I'd processed those invoices myself, though I'd never met anyone from Meridian, never seen any reports or deliverables from their supposed work. I opened another folder. More payments to Meridian. And another company, Summit Advisory Group. Same pattern, regular monthly payments, no clear explanation for services rendered. My heart began to beat faster. I cross-referenced the approval signatures. Every single one had been authorized by Chad Harrison Jr. I dug deeper, opening older files, tracking the payments backwards. They'd started almost exactly when Chad took over as director. Before that, nothing. These companies hadn't existed in our system when his father was in charge. I pulled out my personal notebook files, the ones where I'd kept notes on every vendor, every contact, every detail that might matter. Neither Meridian nor Summit had phone numbers listed in our records, no physical addresses, no contact names beyond a generic email. They were ghosts. Shell companies, I realized, my hands going cold around my teacup. Chad was funneling company money to fake businesses, and I'd been processing the payments without knowing what they really were. He'd used me, used my trust and my efficiency to hide his theft. I sat back in Frank's chair and stared at the screen, watching the numbers blur slightly as my eyes watered, not from sadness this time, but from something else entirely. Oh, Frank, they have no idea what they've done, I whispered to the empty room.
Chapter 3. The Whisper Network. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Frank's desk until 3 a.m., printing page after page of records, my old printer whirring and clicking in the quiet house. By dawn, I had a stack of documents 6 inches thick, all carefully organized with sticky notes in my neat handwriting. But I needed someone else to see what I was seeing, someone I could trust. At 9 o'clock, I called Rosa Mendez. Rosa had been the bookkeeper at Harrison & Cole for 23 years before retiring 5 years ago. We'd had lunch together every Tuesday for the past decade, a tradition that continued even after she left. She was sharper than any accountant I had ever met, with an eye for numbers that bordered on supernatural. "Evie," her warm voice answered on the second ring. "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" "I need to see you," I said quietly. "Can you come over?" There was a pause. Rosa knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived in 18, her silver hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, concern written across her round face. I'd already made coffee, the strong kind she liked, and laid out the documents on the dining room table like evidence at a trial. "Dios mío," she whispered when I told her what happened yesterday. Then her eyes narrowed. "And you found something, didn't you? I can see it in your face." I showed her the payment records.
Rosa put on her reading glasses and bent over the papers, her finger tracing the numbers, her lips moving silently as she calculated. I knew that look. It was the same expression she'd worn when she'd caught a vendor overcharging us by 30 cents per unit, 5 years running. After 20 minutes, she sat back heavily in her chair. "Evelyn, this is embezzlement," she said, her voice low and serious. "These shell companies, they're not real. Someone set them up to funnel money out of Harrison and Cole. Look here." She pointed to a payment. "Same amount, same day each month. That's not consulting work. That's systematic theft." My stomach tightened even though I'd suspected as much. Hearing Rosa confirm it made it real. "How much?" I asked. Rosa pulled out her phone and started typing numbers into the calculator. Her face grew darker with each entry. "Conservatively, over the 18 months these payments have been running, about $270,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. $250,000. Stolen, right under everyone's noses, including mine. "There's more," Rosa said, flipping through another section of documents. She stopped on a page I'd marked with a yellow tab. "These pension contributions? Do you see this?" I leaned closer. It was the quarterly pension report from December. "The company's supposed to match employee contributions," Rosa continued, her finger moving down the columns. "But look, these contributions were processed, deducted from paychecks, but the company match never went into the pension fund. It went," she flipped to another page, "here, to something called Benefits Administration Account." "What does that mean?" I asked, though a cold dread was already settling in my chest. "It means they stole from the pension fund, Evie, from people who've worked there for years, counting on that money for retirement. They've redirected it to an account they control." She looked up at me, her dark eyes fierce. "This isn't just embezzlement. This is evil." I thought of Jamie, my young coworker with the succulent plant. She had 2 kids and a mortgage. I thought of Marcus in accounting, who just turned 50 and talked about retiring at 65. I thought of all the people who trusted that their money was safe, that their futures were secure. They'd stolen from all of them. And they'd fired me the same day, probably because Chad was worried I'd eventually notice. "We need to go to the police," Rosa said firmly. "The FBI even. This is serious, Evie." I stared at the paper spread across my table, at the evidence of betrayal and greed. Then I thought of Chad's smug face, his relief when I'd walked out quietly. "No," I said softly. "What?" I looked up at her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, exactly, but something colder and more purposeful. "They need to face me first," I said. "They need to know it was me." Rosa studied my face for a long moment, then slowly a smile curved across her lips. "Ah, Evie," she said. "Frank would be so proud of you."
Chapter 4. The Job Offer. Rosa left that afternoon with a promise to keep everything quiet, but not before squeezing my hand tightly at the door. "Be careful, mi amiga," she'd said. "These people have already shown you who they are." I knew she was right, but I also knew that evidence from 6 months ago might not be enough. Chad could claim he'd fixed the problems. He could say I was a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. I needed current proof, documentation that the theft was still happening, right now, under everyone's noses, which meant I needed to get back inside Harrison and Cole. That evening, I sat at my vanity and studied my reflection. I'd always worn my gray hair long, pulled back in a neat bun for work, professional, dignified. Everyone at Harrison and Cole knew that bun as well as they knew my name. So I cut it. Well, not myself. I'm not that brave. But the next morning, I drove to a salon across town where nobody knew me and asked the stylist to take off 6 inches and add layers. When she finished, I barely recognized myself. My hair fell just past my shoulders now, softer and more modern. With different makeup, a bit more color on my lips, different frames for my reading glasses, I looked like someone else entirely. Not younger exactly, but different. Someone Chad and Lena might walk right past without a second glance. The transformation felt strange, like putting on a costume. But Frank had always said I had an unremarkable face, meant as a compliment in his way. You blend in, Evie. People underestimate you because you don't demand attention. For the first time, I was going to use that to my advantage. Harrison and Cole had 3 branch offices, the main one in Dallas where I'd worked, and 2 smaller satellite offices, one in Fort Worth and one in Arlington. I'd visited the Arlington office maybe twice in 35 years, always briefly. The staff there wouldn't know me. I checked their website. They were hiring a part-time file clerk. Data entry and document organization. No experience necessary, flexible hours. Perfect. I created a new email address under the name Eve Palmer. My middle name was Palmer, my mother's maiden name. I kept my application simple. Recent widow, looking to stay active, comfortable with computers, excellent organizational skills. I didn't mention Harrison and Cole. Instead, I listed my volunteer work at the library and the church office. 3 days later, I got a call for an interview. The Arlington office was smaller than I remembered, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a dental office. I wore khaki slacks and a simple blue cardigan, nothing like my usual work wardrobe. My hand shook slightly as I pushed open the glass door. The office manager was a tired-looking woman named Patricia, maybe 45, with paperwork stacked across her desk. She barely glanced at my resume. "Can you use a computer?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Word, Excel, basic database entry." "Can you start Monday?" My heart pounded. Absolutely. "It's minimum wage, 20 hours a week, mostly filing, some data entry, organizing old records. We're drowning in paperwork since corporate keeps changing the system." "That's fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just need something to keep me busy since my husband passed." Patricia's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. Look, it's not glamorous work, but we need someone reliable. The last 3 people quit after a week." "I'm very reliable." And I meant it. She handed me a badge with Eve Palmer, file clerk, printed across it. Looking at that name, at this fake identity I created, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. That weekend, I practiced signing Eve Palmer until it felt natural. I rehearsed my backstory: widow, 2 grown children, living alone in Arlington. I picked out a completely new work wardrobe, nothing Evelyn Parker would ever wear. On Monday morning, I walked into Harrison and Cole Arlington as someone else entirely. Nobody recognized me. Nobody questioned me. I was invisible, exactly as I had always been. But this time, I wasn't keeping their secrets. I was stealing them back. The first document I copied was a current expense report. Summit Advisory Group, $5,000. Approved. By Chad Harrison, Jr. 2 weeks ago. I slipped the paper into my purse, my heart racing, and thought, this is just the beginning.
Chapter 5. The Gala Night. For 3 weeks, I worked at the Arlington office as Eve Palmer, filing clerk. I arrived early, left late, and kept my head down. Patricia praised my efficiency. The younger staff barely noticed me, just another older woman shuffling papers. But I noticed everything. I copied expense reports, payroll discrepancies, internal memos about budget reallocations that made my blood run cold. Every document went onto a flash drive I kept hidden in my purse, backed up each night on Frank's computer. The theft wasn't just continuing, it was accelerating. In 3 weeks, I documented another $40,000 funneled through fake companies, and the pension fund redirections were worse than Rosa and I had initially thought. Nearly a dozen employees' retirement savings had been skimmed. including, I discovered with a sharp pain in my chest, my own. But I still needed the right moment, the right audience. Then I saw the flyer in the break room. Harrison and Cole Annual Charity Gala, April 12th, Dallas Convention Center, black tie event. Of course, the gala. I'd helped organize it for 15 years before they'd assigned it to the marketing department. A fundraiser for local schools where Chad could play the generous benefactor in front of clients, investors, and most importantly, the board of directors, including Mary Ann Cole, the widow of James Cole, the company's co-founder. Mary Ann was 82 now, sharp as a tack, but mostly retired from daily operations. She still held her late husband's seat on the board, though she rarely attended meetings anymore. But she never missed the gala. It had been her husband's favorite night of the year. I'd known Mary Ann for decades. She'd always treated me kindly, remembering my birthday, asking about Frank's health when he was sick. She was old school, the kind of woman who believed a company should take care of its people because it was the right thing to do. She deserved to know what her husband's legacy had become. The gala was black tie, which meant I needed an invitation. Fortunately, I'd learned that Patricia from the Arlington office was attending, complaining about having to rent a dress. I volunteered to help with coat check, just to feel useful, I said sweetly. Patricia was grateful for the help. On the night of April 12th, I stood in the convention center ballroom wearing a simple black dress and my late mother's pearl necklace. The room glittered with chandeliers and champagne glasses. Women in evening gowns laughed with men in expensive suits. A string quartet played softly in the corner. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past life. Chad stood near the stage in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his arm around his wife Ashley, beaming as people congratulated him. I heard snippets of his conversations as I moved through the crowd. Record profits this quarter. Streamlined operations. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Tough decisions, like firing a woman who dedicated her life to his family's company, like stealing from people's retirement funds. I spotted Mary Ann sitting at a table near the back, elegant in royal blue silk, her white hair perfectly styled. She was alone for the moment, sipping water and watching the crowd with intelligent eyes. My heart hammered as I approached. "Mrs. Cole," I said softly, bending down beside her chair, "you probably don't recognize me. I used to work for you." She studied my face, squinting slightly. "I'm sorry, dear, I don't—" "Evelyn Parker," I whispered. "I worked with your husband for 35 years. Recognition flashed across her face, then confusion. "Evelyn, but you look so— What are you doing here?" I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out the flash drive. It was silver, small enough to hide in a closed fist. "Mrs. Cole," I said quietly, pressing it into her hand, "I need you to look at what's on this drive before Monday's board meeting. Your husband built something beautiful, and it's being destroyed from the inside." "What are you talking about?" Her voice sharpened with concern. I glanced toward Chad, still holding court across the room, oblivious. Embezzlement, pension theft, all carefully hidden in the books. I squeezed her hand gently. "I have proof. Everything you need is on that drive. I just thought you should see what your husband's company has become." Mary Ann's eyes widened, then narrowed with something fierce and protective. "Evelyn!" But I was already standing, already moving away, disappearing back into the crowd before anyone could connect us. As I slipped out of the ballroom into the cool April night, I heard Chad's voice booming through the microphone, beginning his speech about integrity and community values. I smiled in the darkness. Monday was going to be very interesting. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. I spent the weekend in a strange state of calm. I'd done everything I could. The rest was up to Marianne, and I had to trust that the woman I'd known for 35 years would do the right thing. Sunday night, my phone rang. Unknown number. Evelyn. Marianne's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I've spent the entire weekend going through your files with my personal attorney. We need to talk before the board meeting tomorrow. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Did you see everything? Every last page, and I'm furious. She paused. Can you be at the office at 8:30 tomorrow morning, before the others arrive? Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll be there. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every possible scenario. What if they didn't believe me? What if Chad had somehow covered his tracks? What if I'd risked everything for nothing? But when I walked into Harrison and Cole's main conference room at 8:30 a.m., wearing my best navy suit and my mother's pearls, Marianne was already there. So was her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine, and two people I didn't recognize. Evelyn, this is Marcus Chin from the Texas Securities Commission and Detective Sarah Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit. They've been reviewing your evidence since yesterday afternoon. My legs felt weak. You called the authorities? My dear, Marianne said, her voice gentler now. What they did to you was despicable. What they did to this company, to my husband's legacy, is criminal. I won't let it stand. At 9 a.m., the board members began arriving for their monthly meeting. I watched through the small window in the conference room door as they settled into their seats. 5 board members, plus Chad at the head of the table, and Lena sitting in the back with her tablet taking notes as always. Chad looked confident, relaxed. He had no idea what was coming. At 9:15, Marianne stood and walked into the boardroom. I stayed back, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. Through the door, I heard her voice, calm and authoritative. Before we begin with regular business, I need to address a serious matter that's come to my attention. The room went quiet. I've discovered evidence of systematic financial fraud within this company. Embezzlement through shell companies, theft from employee pension funds, all of it carefully documented and all of it authorized by our current director. I heard Chad's voice sharp with shock. That's absurd. What are you talking about? I'm talking about $270,000 funneled through fake consulting companies over 18 months. I'm talking about pension contributions that were redirected to accounts you personally control. Would you like to see the evidence? There was a commotion, raised voices, chair legs scraping. Through the window, I saw Lena's face go pale as Marianne connected a laptop to the projector. That's when Marianne looked toward the door and nodded. It was time. I walked into that boardroom with my head high, and I watched Chad's face drain of color. Lena actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Evelyn, Chad stammered, What are you doing here? I moved to stand beside Marianne, facing the man who'd thrown me away like garbage. You thought firing me would make me disappear. You thought I was just some old woman who'd shuffle away quietly, but you forgot something important, Chad. He stared at me, speechless. You were the one who processed every payment, filed every document, and kept every secret in this company for 35 years. I knew where all the bodies were buried, because I'm the one who buried them. I let that sink in. You didn't just fire an employee. You fired the only person who could have protected you from yourself. I placed my own folder of documents on the table.
the backup copies I'd made, every piece of evidence organized with my neat handwriting on each page. "You fired the wrong secretary," I said quietly. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Chad tried to defend himself, his words tumbling over each other. Lena was crying now, claiming she didn't know, she'd only followed orders. But I just stood there, calm and certain, watching justice finally unfold. Marianne squeezed my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace.
Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Chad tried everything. Denial, then excuses, then finally desperate attempts at negotiation. But the numbers didn't lie, and Marianne was relentless. By 1 p.m., he'd been given a choice: resign immediately and cooperate with the investigation, or be terminated and face immediate criminal charges. He resigned. Lena fared slightly better. She claimed, and I believe it was true, that she'd only processed what Chad told her to process, signed what he told her to sign. She was investigated, suspended without pay, but ultimately kept her job after agreeing to testify against Chad. I saw her in the parking lot a week later, and she couldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Parker," she'd whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should have questioned it. I should have—" "Yes," I said simply, "you should have. Some mistakes you have to live with." The investigation moved quickly once it started. Detective Williams discovered that Chad had been planning to disappear, a one-way ticket to Costa Rica booked for June, a house purchased under his wife's maiden name. He'd been setting up his exit for months, planning to drain the company and vanish before anyone noticed. But he'd made one critical error. He'd assumed I didn't matter. The story hit the local news within days. Construction company executive caught in embezzlement scheme. Reporters called my house, but I didn't answer. I'd said everything I needed to say in that boardroom. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Marianne invited me to lunch at her estate, a beautiful home in Highland Park with roses climbing the garden walls. We sat on her terrace, drinking iced tea and watching hummingbirds dart between the flowers. "I owe you an apology, Evelyn," she said, her weathered hands wrapped around her glass. "I should have been paying closer attention. After James died, I stepped back too much. I let that boy run wild with my husband's legacy." "You trusted him," I said. "That's not a character flaw." "Perhaps," she smiled sadly. "But James always said that trust without verification is just foolishness. He trusted you, though. He told me once that if anything ever happened to him, I should listen to you before anyone else." Tears pricked my eyes. "He was a good man." "He was, and he'd be grateful for what you did." Marianne reached across the table and took my hand. "The board voted unanimously yesterday. We want you back, Evelyn. Not as head secretary. You deserve better than that title ever gave you credit for. We're creating a new position, senior office consultant. You'll oversee operations, mentor the staff, and report directly to the board. Full benefits, restored pension with interest, and," she paused, "a formal written apology from the company for how you were treated." I sat back, overwhelmed. "Marianne, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. We need you. The company needs you." I returned to Harrison and Cole 3 weeks after I'd been fired. But everything was different now. The staff lined up to greet me, not out of obligation, but genuine respect. Jamie, the young woman with the succulent plant, hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You saved our pensions, my kids' future. Thank you." Marcus, our accounting, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. 22 years I've been paying into that fund. You gave me back my retirement." Even Patricia from Arlington came to the main office, laughing when she realized Eve Palmer had been Evelyn Parker all along. "I should have known," she said. "You were too good at filing to be new at this."
But the moment that touched me most was when the younger employees, the ones who'd barely noticed me before, started seeking me out. They asked for advice about office politics, career decisions, how to handle difficult situations. They pulled up chairs to my desk during lunch, listening to stories about the company's history, about their own value, about standing up when something isn't right. I'd spent 35 years being invisible. Now, finally, I was seen. Not as the old woman they could dismiss, but as someone who'd fought for them when they didn't even know they needed fighting for. One afternoon, as I organized files in my new office, a real office with a window and my name on the door, I found myself thinking of Frank. Well, I whispered to the empty room, smiling. I think I'd say I handled that pretty well. And somehow, I knew he was proud.
Chapter 8. The Letter on Her Desk. 6 months passed like pages turning in a well-loved book, steady, purposeful, and full of meaning. Chad Harrison Jr. pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. He received 4 years in prison and was ordered to repay every cent he'd stolen. His wife divorced him before the trial ended. Last I heard, he was working in the prison library, filing books, a fitting irony that wasn't lost on anyone. The stolen pension funds were fully restored, with interest. Marcus retired on schedule at 65, just as he'd planned. Jamie put a down payment on a bigger house, and the company, my company, I'd finally started thinking of it that way, began to heal. I settled into my role as senior office consultant, though the title still felt strange on business cards. Most days, I did what I'd always done, kept things running smoothly, solved problems before they became crises, and made sure people felt valued. But now, when I offered advice, people listened differently. They leaned in. They took notes. They called me Mrs. Parker with a tone that carried respect, not just politeness. On a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after the board meeting, I arrived at my office to find a cream-colored envelope on my desk. My name was written across it in elegant cursive, Marianne's handwriting, unmistakable and graceful. I sat down slowly, running my finger along the envelope's edge before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, the kind Marianne had used for thank you notes back when her husband was alive. Dear Evelyn, I've been thinking about what to say to you for weeks now, and I realize that no words will quite capture what you've meant to this company and to me. You didn't just save Harrison and Cole from financial ruin. You reminded us what integrity looks like. You showed us that true loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's having the courage to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. My James used to say that a company's character isn't shown in how it treats its most valuable people, but in how it treats those it believes it can afford to lose. We failed that test, Evelyn, but you gave us a chance to pass it again. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for believing we were worth saving. And thank you for showing this old woman that it's never too late to fight for what matters. With deepest gratitude and respect, Marianne. I read the letter 3 times, tears sliding down my cheeks that I didn't bother to wipe away. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the photograph of Frank. That evening, I drove to the cemetery for the first time in months. I'd been too busy, too caught up in everything, but suddenly I needed to be there. Frank's headstone was simple gray granite, weathered now by 4 years of Texas sun and rain. I brushed some fallen leaves away and sat down on the grass beside it, not caring about my good slacks. I did it, I told him softly. I stood up for myself. I didn't let them make me feel invisible anymore. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for just a moment, I could almost feel Frank's hand on my shoulder, could almost hear his voice saying what he'd always said when I doubted myself. I never had any doubt, Evie, not for a second. I stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When I finally stood to leave, my knees protested. I was 68 after all, and sitting on the ground wasn't as easy as it used to be. but I was smiling as I brushed the grass from my clothes. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison and Cole just as the sun was rising, painting the building's windows gold. I paused in the parking lot looking at the place that had been my second home for 35 years, the place that had broken my heart and then given me the chance to put it back together, stronger than before. Young Jamie was getting out of her car, her 2 children in tow, for a quick visit before school. She waved enthusiastically. "Morning, Mrs. Parker." "Good morning, sweetheart," I called back, and meant it. I walked through those glass doors with my head high, no longer invisible, no longer just another old woman people could dismiss. I was Evelyn Parker. I had fought for justice and won. And I had learned the most important lesson of all. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself.